I'm Brian from Silhouette, and you're watching liveprog.
You know, they say there is a first time for everything, and there is even a first time for me listening to Gazpacho. Now, normally I'd say Gazpacho, that is something you eat. It's a soup, it's cold, I don't like it. And every time I hear Gazpacho, I have to think back to that episode of Red Dwarf where Rimmer talks about Gazpacho soup.
If only they'd mentioned it in basic training! Instead of climbing up and down ropes and crawling on your elbows through tunnels, if only just once they'd said Gazpacho soup is served cold, I could have been an admiral by now!
But Gazpacho is not just soup, it is also a band from Norway, but the chances are that you know that a lot better than me, because as I said, it's the first time I hear them. Well, not entirely the first time. I have heard of Gazpacho before. As a matter of fact, if I go back to the history of this Norwegian band, they were formed in 1996 and they released their first decent debut album in 2003, and after that they continued to release a couple of albums, which unfortunately none of them I heard. But they have a very strong connection with Marillion. They started out supporting Marillion on the Marillion weekends, and later on they also started to join Marillion on tour, and that's where I saw them when Marillion played in the Netherlands supporting the Marbles album. I saw Gazpacho opening up for Marillion, and I gotta be honest, they didn't stick with me, so I never, bothered to listen to them. But of course along the way I heard more and more about this band, and a lot of people were really enthusiastic about it, so I thought, well, maybe I should listen to them, maybe I should. And then at a certain point I received an envelope, and I opened the envelope up and there came this album, Demon, the brand new album by Gazpacho. See, it is a really beautiful digipack with artwork in it, and I have to be honest and bring it up close, I find the lyrics a bit hard to read. Yeah, probably has to fit in the whole idea of the album, because I also got this, a press sheet, and I gotta say I was happy I got that press sheet, because normally, as I said before, when I get an album like that, I just put it on and start listening to it, and usually the first thing I do is put them on my iPhone so I can listen to them when I cycle to work. And I was listening to it, and I had a feeling, the first feeling I had was like, oh, this sounds very retro, it sounds more old than it sounds progressive going forward. But I listened to it, and I came home and listened to it a little bit more, and then I took out this piece of paper, which doesn't say much, but it does tell about the concept of this album, and I think that is very important to understand why they made this album, how they made it. It is a concept album, and although there are 5 tracks, I don't know if you can see it, 5 tracks listed, one of them is a bonus track. That last track, The Cage, is not part of the story that the band tells in the first 4 tracks. And then you start to think, what would this be about? Well, and that's where I was happy that I got this, as I said, this sheet, because here they explain it, and in a nutshell, it is a conversation of one of the founding members of the band with his father about a trip to Czechoslovakia, to Prague, where they found a manuscript in an apartment that had been refurbished after it had been burned. And that manuscript told stories about a demon or a ghost that would live there, and lots of things in it. Yeah, and those kind of ideas were in that manuscript. It says here that they gave the manuscript to a library in Prague where they thought it would be of interest to students of psychiatry. So they have their doubts whether it's real or not. But as they says here, whether it's real or not, it was an interesting concept to write an album about. And that's what the band did, and that became Demon. So the backdrop of this story is a ghost, an active ghost living in a house. That's the idea. So that puts the music that I was listening to in perspective, because my first thoughts when I was listening to this album were mainly, it's kind of boring. Yeah, and it's kind of depressing as well. But at the same time, I also thought it is very beautiful. I mean, when you listen very good to this album and you see through the depressing parts in it, it is actually a very beautiful album. And when I posted on Facebook that I was listening to my first Gazpacho album, one person said, you know, you either love it or you hate it. I gotta be honest, I have been listening to this album quite a bit because I find it a very difficult album to really get my hands on. And the more I listened to it, the more I started to see the beauty of the album. The way that the band has crafted the songs, they really did it very well. In the backdrop, I still had that idea that it sounds a little bit boring, it sounds a little bit depressing, it sounds very retro, it doesn't sound modern at all. But of course the story that they are bringing is also not a new story, it is a story from the past. So in that way I do understand the angle that the band took on this album, and I have no frame of reference, but I did check out the website of the band and look at the biography, and there I saw that the previous two albums of Gazpacho also deal with things like death and like ghosts and those kind of things. So, you know, they have sort of almost, I would say, a trilogy of, you know, supernatural themes in their albums, and apparently they like it. But at the same time, they say in that press sheet that this is the, let me see, to cheat here, the most complicated and strange album Gazpacho has ever made. Okay. So the other album should be more normal than this one, I take it from there. But still, when I listen to the album, and it's not a long album, I mean, including the bonus track, it is just under 50 minutes of music, with a few longer tracks, especially I think the biggest epic on this album, and also the most interesting track is the fourth track, the end of the actual story, Death Room, where they really show that they are not just amazing songwriters, but also amazing musicians. And they don't go over the top, they really keep everything down. I mean, even in the parts where you have the big band idea, you know, the drums, the bass, the guitars, the heavier guitars in it, it still doesn't sound heavy, it still sounds a bit heavier. But the general tone of the album is very melancholic, very, a bit, well, as I said, a bit depressing, a bit sad. Lots of piano in it, violin in it, very beautiful, I liked it very much. Also, the vocals are a bit strange. I mean, when I was listening to the album, there were certain parts that I didn't really like the vocals, and other parts I thought, okay, this sounds a little bit better. Maybe also the singer changes his voice to fit also the mood in the music. There were two tracks that definitely stood out for me. And that is the second track, The Wizard of Altai Mountain, which is a bit of a standout name as well when you look at the tracks. I mean, the opening track is called I've Been Walking, the third track is called I've Been Walking Part 2, you have Death Room and you have The Cage, and then you have that second track called The Wizard of Altai Mountain. Well, that stands out immediately, but also musically it stands out, especially in the second half of the track, where they bring in an accordion. Now, I always like it when they bring in unusual instruments, create unusual melodies and unusual sounds, because that makes an album interesting to listen to. And that track really, you know, benefits from that accordion. I really like that addition. It starts out a bit melancholic, but it moves into a more, I would almost say, happier sound. I would say a bit of a sort of a gypsy dance. That kind of idea is what that second part gives me, and I like that very much, and it just adds a little bit of, you know, better feeling towards the entire album. And I have to mention again Death Room. That track also really stood out for me. It's almost 19 minutes long, and they really use up that time to really create an interesting song that keeps you listening to it. they also add some nice elements in it there. One of the things that stands out for me in that track is especially the violin. I like that very much. But there was one point that I thought, I have heard this melody before. This sounds so familiar. There is a part, and it comes back later on in the song as well, where the violin plays a melody and you would almost start to sing Mariah Carey's Without You to that melody. It's a little bit different, but it gives me, at least that's what made me think of it. Of course, if you don't like Mariah Carey, we'll butch it up a little bit. Harry Nilsson, you know, that's the original writer of that song. But that melody, it really resembles it very much. Now, probably a coincidence, but a funny one. Then again, you know, it is about ghosts and they are inspired by it, so you never know what subconscious influence came into this album. I don't know about that, but I have to be honest, I didn't love it, but I also didn't hate it. I think this is an album that really needs a lot of time to really grasp, to really get into, and it also has to do with the mood. I mean, if you listen to this album when the sun is shining and the birds are out there and the flowers are out there, and then the effect might not be as good. But if you play this album on a grey and rainy day like it is today, it might put you in a better mood, or a cold winter's evening, you know, that kind of things. So your mood is important for this one, and I usually listen to the music to adapt my mood. Sometimes I want to change my mood and listen to it. Sometimes I want to enhance my mood with it. So I don't know what will happen with this album in the future, how I will play it. But I must say, my first taste of Gazpacho didn't taste as bad. I don't prefer, I will never eat the real Gazpacho soup, but the Gazpacho music does sound very interesting. I'm really, so far I'm really enjoying this album, despite its, well, its sad and depressing mood that it gives me. So, well, who knows, maybe I will go into the back catalogue of the band and listen to more of them, and maybe then it will click. I mean, it also has to do with a connection that has been made, and well, in this case the connection hasn't been made yet, but I see potential for it, so I definitely like it. And I think a lot more people than me will already have heard this album, but if you are not familiar with Gazpacho, this is the first one I hear of them, so I would definitely say give it at least a listen. Listen to it and see from there what you think of it. So now, as I said, I am a Gazpacho, well, not a Gazpacho virgin anymore. I have it now, but probably a lot more people have heard this album, know this band far better than I do. So let me know what you think of this album and what other albums of Gazpacho are, well, worth to listen to if you are not familiar with the band. That's it. I'm going to brighten up my mood. I'm going to finish my coffee and listen to another album, because I have more albums to listen to and more reviews to record. So thank you for watching, and I hope you will see me at a new review.